Yeah.
Can I see that for a second?
Ah. It is.
You guys want the book? Thy nativity, O Theotokos Virgin, hath proclaimed joy to all the world. For from thee hath dawned the Son of righteousness, Christ our God, annulling the curse and bestowing the blessing, abolishing death and granting us life eternal.
Okay. So, we'll start with a little pop quiz. What is another name for the Mongols?
The Tartars?
The Tartars.
For the what?
The Mongols are known typically by the Russians as the Tartars. And I'm not sure if in the...
Yeah, I
life-
mentioned in
Is that
his
the
life,
same
yeah.
as Tatars?
Yes,
I've been confused about that before.
yes. So, who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Okay.
Alright. So the holy martyrs, Prince Michael and his counselor Theodore of Chernogov. They're commemorated on September 20. The holy martyr, Prince Michael of Chernogov, son of Sviavolod Ogovich, the dark red, was noted from childhood for his piety and mildness. His health was very poor, but in 1186, trusting the mercy of God, the young prince asked for the holy prayers of Saint Nikita the Stylite of Pereslavl, who during these years received renown for his prayerful intercession before the Lord. After he received a wooden staff from the holy ascetic, the prince was healed at once. In 1223, Prince Michael took part in a council of Russian princes at Kiev, debating whether to aid the Polovtsians against the approaching Mongol Tartar hordes. With the death of his uncle, Mstislav of Chernogov, in the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, St. Michael became the Prince of Chernogov. In 1225, he was invited to be the Prince of the Novgorod people. Through his sense of justice, compassion, and firmness, he gained the love and respect of old Novgorod. This was particularly important for the Novgorodians, since the accession of Michael as a prince signified the reconciliation of Novgorod with the city of Vladimir's holy great prince George Sviavolodovich, whose wife was the holy princess Agatha, sister of Prince Michael. But Saint Michael did not long remain prince of Novgorod. He soon returned to his native Chernogov. To the stipulation and request of the Novgorodians to remain prince, he answered that Chernogov and Novgorod ought to become kindred lands, and their inhabitants like brothers, and he would forge the bonds of friendship of these cities. The noble prince assiduously concerned himself with the building up of his appanage realm, but it was difficult for him in these troubled times. His activity provoked unease and cursed Prince Oleg, and in 1227, internecine strife nearly erupted, but Metropolitan Kirill of Kiev reconciled them. And in the same year, Prince Michael peacefully resolved a dispute between the Kiev great prince Vladimir Rurikovich and the Gallic prince. In 1235, Prince Michael occupied the throne of Kiev. Troublesome times ensued. In 1238, the Tartars, Mongols, laid waste to Ryazan, Zuzdal, and Vladimir. In 1239, they moved against South Russia and ravaged the left bank of the Dnieper River and the lands of Chernogov and Pereslavl. By the autumn of 1240, the Mongols were coming close to Kiev. The Khan's emissaries proposed that Kiev surrender voluntarily, but the prince would not negotiate with them. Prince Michael wrote urgently to Hungary to persuade the Hungarian King Bela to organize allied forces to resist the common enemy. St. Michael tried to recruit both Poland and the German emperor into the struggle against the Mongols, but the moment for a combined resistance was lost. Rus was devastated, and later Hungary and Poland. With no foreign support, Prince Michael returned to the ruins of Kiev, and for a certain time he lived near the city on an island, and then he resettled in Chernogov. The prince did not abandon hope in the possibility of a united Christian Europe against the Hasidic raids. In 1245, at the Council of Lyons in France, his co-worker, Metropolitan Peter, was sent as an emissary by St. Michael, calling for a crusade to march against the pagan horde. Catholic Europe, in the persons of its chief spiritual leaders, the Roman Pope and the German Emperor, betrayed the interests of Christianity. The Pope was involved in a war with the German Emperor, and the Germans took advantage of the Mongol invasion to attack Rus themselves. In these circumstances affecting Christianity in general, there was a universal significance to the confessor's deed of the martyred Orthodox prince St. Michael of Chernogov in the midst of the pagan horde. In Rus, emissaries of the Khan soon appeared in order to conduct a census of the Russian population and to impose taxes upon it. The prince was ordered to make a full submission to the Tartar Khan, and for his princely realm, the Khan would grant a special charter. The emissaries informed Prince Michael that it was necessary for him to journey to the horde for an affirmation of rights to rule the princedom under the Khan's charter. Seeing the woeful plight of Rus, Prince Michael recognized the need to obey the Khan, but as a fervent Christian, he knew that he would not deny his faith before the pagans. From his spiritual father, Bishop John, he received a blessing to journey to the horde and be a true confessor of the name of Christ. With the holy Prince Michael on the journey to the horde went his faithful friend and companion, the noble Theodore. At the horde, they knew about Prince Michael's attempts to organize an uprising against the Tartars, in concert with Hungary and other European powers. His enemies had long sought the opportunity to destroy him. In 1246, when Prince Michael and the boyar Theodore arrived at the horde, they were instructed on how to go to the Khan, to proceed through a fire, to cleanse them of their evil intents, and to worship the primal elements considered gods by the Mongols, the sun and fire. In answer to the pagan priests commanding them to perform the pagan rituals, the holy prince replied, "A Christian worships only God, the creator of the world, and not creatures." They reported to the Khan about the firmness of the Russian prince. Batu's attendants, Eldeg, delivered the conditions: either fulfill the demands of the pagan priests or die in torments. But this also was followed by the resolute answer of holy Prince Michael: "I am prepared to submit to the emperor, since that God has entrusted him the destiny of earthly kingdoms, but as a Christian, I cannot worship idols." The fate of the brave Christians were sealed. Taking courage in the words of the Lord, "Whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall save it." Matthew 16:25. The holy princes and his devoted boyar prepared for a martyr's death and received the holy mysteries, which their spiritual father gave them, foreseeing this possibility. The Tartar executioners seized the prince, and for a long time they beat him fiercely, until the ground ran crimson with blood. Finally, Domanus, an apostate from the faith in Christ, cut off the head of the holy martyr. The Tartars deceitfully promised St. Theodore great honor and his lord's princely rank if he would fulfill the pagan ritual. But St. Theodore was not swayed by this, and he followed in the path of his prince. After quite vicious torments, they beheaded him. The bodies of the holy passion bearers were thrown to be eaten by dogs, but the Lord miraculously guarded them for several days until faithful Christians could secretly bury them with reverence. Later on, the relics of the holy martyrs were transferred to Chernogov. The confessor's act of St. Theodore amazed even his executioners. Persuaded of the Russian people's steadfast fidelity to the Orthodox faith and their readiness to die for Christ with joy, the Tartar Khans decided not to try the patience of God as before, and ceased demanding that Russians at the horde perform any pagan rituals. But the struggle of the Russian nation and the Russian Church against the Mongol yoke continued for yet a long time. The Orthodox Church was adorned in this struggle by new martyrs and confessors. Great Prince Theodore was poisoned by the Mongols. Also martyred were St. Roman of Ryazan, St. Michael of Tver, and his sons, Demetrius and Alexander. All of these took courage from the example and holy prayers of the Russian proto-martyr of the horde, St. Michael of Chernogov. On February 14, 1572, at the wish of Tsar Ivan Vasilevich the Terrible, and with the blessing of Metropolitan Anthony, the relics of the holy martyrs were transferred to Moscow, to the temple dedicated to them. From there, in 1770, they were transferred to the Visitation Cathedral, and on November 21, 1774, the Archangel Cathedral of the Moscow Kremlin. The lives and service to Saints Michael and Theodore were compiled in the mid-16th century by the renowned church writer Saint Zenobius of Omsk. The generation of the upright shall be blessed, says holy psalmist David. This occurred in full measure for St. Michael. He is at the head of many famous families in Russian history. His children and grandchildren continued the holy Christian service of St. Michael. The church also numbers his daughter, St. Euphrosyne of Zuzdal, and his grandson, St. Oleg of Bryansk, among the saints. And I have here an icon of him and his boyar.
What is a boyar?
I'm not exactly sure. I think it's some sort of attendant or advisor.
That was a noble.
It's a noble.
Yeah.
Typically a warrior.
Oh, okay.
Russia, for that matter, the Orthodox East, never had feudalism in the sense that the West had it. So you don't have, you do have some of the same titles or similar titles, Duke and so forth. But they had noble warriors or whatever, leaders of the bands, and they were called boyars in Russian. And Theodore the boyar was especially close to Prince Michael. Their lives are also in the collection of Lives of Saint by Saint Dmitri of Rostov. And he adds to the account we just heard that there were a number of other Russian princes there. After the Mongols went in and flattened these Russian cities and killed anybody who was left, the people who fled would come back, and the Khans would allow the princes to continue to rule over their land, provided they pay taxes. And as the life you read mentioned, there was a requirement that they all go to the horde, to the Khan in the horde, to get the approval to continue to rule and to pay the taxes. And in doing that, then the Mongols were making them pass through this fire and offer sacrifice to their idols. There were a number of Russian princes who did just that. And in the life, as recounted by Saint Dmitri of Rostov, he names a few of them, and they encouraged, these other princes urged Michael and Theodore to just go ahead and do it, or pretend to have worshipped or offered sacrifice, and then, they don't have to mean it. They can go back home and continue to rule. And in fact, they went on and said, well, any penance that you're given for doing this, we will also assume. Which, if you think about the lives of the Christian martyrs in the early centuries of Christianity, this is precisely what some of the Romans were offering the martyrs to do. And the saints of the first centuries refused this, because even to say that you've offered a sacrifice to a pagan idol and not having really done that is still a betrayal of the faith.
Plus, it's a lie.
It's a lie. It's a lie.
It's a false witness. Yeah, they're supposed to be.
Exactly. And then it also calls to mind that at the World Council of Churches meeting in Australia, this would have been 25 years ago or so, they had these Aboriginal shamans present, and they set up their purifying fire that the Orthodox hierarchs, who were members of the World Council of Churches, went through. And it caused a scandal, but nothing came of it among the World Orthodox. Similarly, at Assisi, they did the same kind of thing.
How was the Bishop Sergius left the OCA after that?
Yeah,
Because that's all that happened. A handful of people just said, this isn't going to change.
right. So the betrayal of faith is alive and well today, and these people aren't even being threatened with their lives or with torture.
They're just being asked to do it, and they're doing it.
Yeah. And this is a primary reason of why this church exists. It is a confession of faith that that we are making, and it is not good enough to just stand on the side and say, well, that was them, or that's some bishop, it doesn't affect me. because the faith of the bishops is the faith of their churches, and whatever the priests or the laity in those dioceses may think or believe themselves, the faith that they're following is the faith of their bishop. And even worse than this, the synods of bishops, you could say, well, it was just, the representatives that were at the World Council of Churches. And that's only, a handful. It's a fairly small number. And the Moscow Patriarchate has over 300 bishops now. Well, hey, it's only 2 or 3 of these bishops. It's not the rest of them. But they still remain in communion with these people. There's no discipline against them. There is no defrocking of them. There's no penance. And so by accepting in silence the action of these people, they have taken upon themselves the sins that the others committed in their name. Because these people went through that fire in the name of Orthodox hierarchs. And they offered a sacrifice to some snake worship, or some snake gods of snake worship. The same sort of thing. It's disgusting.
It's interesting how after St. Michael refused to do that, then the Khans decided to stop requiring it.
Yeah.
So that those who followed after him could benefit even if they weren't as strong as he.
Most specifically, St. Alexander Nevsky was forced to go to the horde and do the same kind of thing. He had to basically swear fealty to the Khan and receive approval to rule in Novgorod. And he was asked or told that he needed to go through the fire and offer worship to the idols, and he refused. But he was not killed. He was not martyred. And St. Dimitri, in his life, said that it was because the Khan had a great deal of respect for Nevsky. He was a noted warrior. St. Dimitri's life on Theodore and Michael says that when the Khan came to Kiev, they left for Hungary. And it was only after the Khan had retreated from Kiev that they came back, and then they went and made the trip to the Mongol horde. And then Batu himself, St. Dimitri says, when he was attacking Poland and Hungary, was killed by the Hungarians. And he's saying God was not mocked. He took his vengeance. You also mentioned the word appanage. What is an appanage?
Say that again?
Appanage, A-P-A-N-A-G-E. There's several ways in which monarchies pass on inheritance. Those that want a strong monarch pass it all to one person. The Russians didn't do that. They divided the realm into territories for each of the sons. And that's what the appanage is. It's another Russian word. Which is why you have all these princes in Ryazan and Chernogov and Smolensk and Novgorod. And the great prince was in Kiev, which at that point was the capital of Rus. Well, it was the capital of Rus before the Mongols. After the Mongols flattened Kiev, there wasn't much left there for centuries. And the great prince moved first to Vladimir and then ultimately to Moscow. It creates a problem, and your life that you gave us kind of touches on this. What happens when you have a bunch of princelings who have a small territory that they think is not enough.
Get even with their from their grudges that they've held by using a foreign adversary without thinking ahead to, oh, if this relative falls, you know, that might be a problem for me down the line.
Well, that's one of the reasons why the Mongols or the Tartars were able to go in and flatten Russia, because there was no unity among the Russians. But
Well, they also, like, the great Prince Vladimir's sons killed each other.
yes, I was going to mention, who are Boris and
Gleb.
Gleb?
They were the sons that were murdered by Svyatopolk.
Yeah.
Svyatopolk.
Yeah.
And they are interesting because they are considered passion bearers. They did not fight their brother. They accepted him killing them rather than to fight against them. And they were, I think, the first two saints declared by the Russian Orthodox Church. This was just after the death of Prince Vladimir, at the beginning of the 11th century, 10th century, 11th century. And of course these princes, they have multiple sons and they're constantly fighting. It was only after the Tartars that a centralization of authority begins. And first the great prince, and then he takes on the title of Tsar under Ivan IV the Terrible. Okay, what else did we want to say about this? Why is he called a Wonderworker? Because that's where we started. Let's see. This is from the life of, as reported by Saint Dimitri. One of the Khan's servants, an evildoer named Damanus, who had once been a Christian and had renounced Christ, embraced the impiety of the Tartars, seeing the saint bearing torture bravely, became enraged at him. Being a foe of the Christians, he took out his knife and stretched forth his hand, and taking the saint by the head, severed his head from his body, casting it aside, even as the saint continued to repeat his martyric confession, I am a Christian. Oh, marvelous wonder! The martyr's head is violently cut off and flung away, and yet it continues to proclaim and declare Christ from its lips.
That's a wonder.
Yeah. Let's see, there's another one here too. Saint Theodore did the same thing. Let's see what this. The pillar of fire appeared above their corpses, shining brilliantly through the day and lighting the night for all to behold it. This was after their death. After putting the holy martyrs to death, the godless Batu, together with all his hosts, attacked the kingdoms of the west, Poland and Hungary. But the accursed one was killed by Prince Vladislav of Hungary. Thus did his evil life come to its wicked end. He was cast into the fires of Hades, but the holy martyrs inherited the kingdom of heaven, where they glorify the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit unto the ages. Amen. And that's how he ends it. He takes the bulk of this life from the chronicle of the Kiev caves, where it was recorded. So there's some flavor to the way this life is written. Evil. The accursed Batu came to his evil end. Okay.
A poetic license in there.
Yeah. Anything else about Saint Michael and
On that icon, where's the icon?
Right here.
I didn't understand what it says at the top.
Knyaz,
Knowles. And then this is
Nasha,
abbreviated.
yeah. Yeah, Knyaz was
Prince.
prince. The Russian rulers, or the rulers of Rus, now you'll get a different emphasis if you're talking to Ukrainian than if you're talking to a Russian. The Russians will say the Russian princes of Kiev and the Russian princes of Kiev would use the title Veliki Knaz, great prince. And these princes of Novgorod and Suzdal and Ryazan and so forth would use the title Knaz. And then actually, I think it was Vasily, Ivan the Terrible's father. I think he's the first one to claim the title Tsar. What's the origin of the title Tsar?
Caesar.
Caesar. They're taking, and that would be a king, because it's only with Peter he claims the title beyond Tsar, Imperator.
So it looks like Ivan the Fourth was the first to declare himself a
Oh,
Tsar.
okay, then it was Ivan. Peter the Great claimed the title of Imperator, Emperor.
And then they all had that after that? Because I know Tsar Nicholas was called
Imperator.
Emperor.
Yes, once a title has been claimed or seized, as the case may be, the following rulers only rarely will relinquish it, even after they've lost their realm. And there is to this day a Romanov pretender to the Russian throne. And the Russians could tell you exactly which one it would be. Now there's a dispute between them because there's two claimants, as is often the case. Can the Tsar descend through the female line versus the male line? There's some dispute over that. Who's closest, that kind of thing. That's not anything we need to worry about. Okay.
Why don't we get these? There was this convert guy that he was a real imperialist, big time.
Yeah.
And he came with this other guy that we're gonna have a weapon to bring back the Tsar and all this kind of stuff, and show all these film clips of marching soldiers and stuff, and I don't know.
Yeah. Well, if it were such that a Tsar was going to be brought back to Russia, I suspect that there's only one way in which it would be done. And that was the way in which the Romanovs gained the throne, which was through a Zemsky Sobor, a
Yeah.
council of the land. Because when Ivan died, well, when his son died, there were claimants, but there was no direct heir, and there was dispute over whose claim is best. And plus, the Poles are battering down the doors of Moscow. And so the nobles and the clergy and the great people of the land came together in a council, and they picked Michael Romanov to be the Tsar. They wanted his father, but I think it was the Poles, or maybe it was one of his predecessors, forcibly tonsured him a monk,
Oh.
and then cast him into prison. And actually, he was imprisoned by Poles, and he was released finally, and they made him patriarch. And Michael agreed to take the throne in this early 17th century only on the condition that his father would co-rule with him. So this is one of those weird situations where when the patriarch was alive, he was kind of a co-ruler with his son. This is off the topic of Michael Chernogov, but there's all kinds of interesting stuff like that.
Hmm.
This is the sort of history that you probably never particularly cared about.
Oh, I find it interesting, but I don't remember things well anymore, so it goes in one ear and out the
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
So people should learn that when they're children.
Yeah. So if there were going to be the return of a tsar to the Russian throne, it would almost have to be that way, because that's the only way you can get legitimacy.
But I think we talked about this subject a while ago, and you were talking about even the royal family when they, after the Bolshevik Revolution, a lot of them ended up going under the Moscow Patriarchate when it was clearly KGB.
As a matter of fact, they first fled and to Western Europe and the United States for that matter, and they were part of the Rocorps. But then in the 90s, when communism fell and the communists are no more, the head of the Romanov family hooked up with the Moscow Patriarchate, and then when the Soviets found the relics of the Tsar and his family, they were front and center in Petersburg for the burial or the internment of these relics with the Moscow Patriarchate, and they routinely now go to Russia. But of course, Putin is not about to bring back the Romanovs.
Right.
He's smart enough to know that in this modern day and age, nobody wants a king, especially a king who can rule. It's much better to be president, or the case may be prime minister, or alternate between the two.
Or maybe the Russians would want a king, but he doesn't want that.
Well,
He doesn't want competition.
They can set it up like the English. They've got a queen. but
Putin
they
is
also
not
try
about
to
to allow
share
a
everything.
tsar of any kind.
I think we've
When
gone
did-
off topic.
We've
When
run
did the
off
title change back from emperor to czar? Do you know?
It never did.
It never
They
did.
never did it.
It's just in the West we call them tsars.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
they call them tsars. Okay, enough of Prince Michael and Theodore the Boyar. Joachim and Anna.
So, Anna had quite a bit of material here, and I'm not finding all the links she had in it. She's got 3 sections, and I want to present part of it, but I'd like your help. Bob.
Okay.
A lot of it had pertains to what you spoke to yesterday in your gospel, in your homily, and so I think we're all familiar with that. There are a few points beside that I found interesting, and that she did too. One of them was that so Joachim was of the lineage of Judah and descended from King David, and Anna was the daughter of Nathan, a priest,
Mm-hmm.
from the lineage of Levi. So they have 3 daughters, Mary, Sophia, and Anna. And Mary has a daughter named Salome,
Mm-hmm.
who is one of the
Murberers.
myrrh-bearers. And then Sophia has, gosh, where are they at? Sophia has Elizabeth,
Mm-hmm.
and then Mary, or excuse me, Anna has Mary and Jesus. Mary has Salome. She is also the wife of Zebedee and the mother of James and John.
Yes.
So all 3 of these daughters of this couple are real prominent, and I found that interesting. And another thing, and Anna did too. Another thing that she noticed in here was that there were fertility problems, and there was persistence of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
They persisted and they persisted and they persisted before Anna was born. anyway, there was a lot of praying going on, and they didn't give up. And since coming here and going to confession frequently, I hear the words often, don't give up and continue to pray. And that seems to be a pretty good formula. So I like that. And then there's a tradition in here regarding Charlemagne and Anna, and it says that Anna purchased a cemetery plot for herself and her family and was buried in Jerusalem. And then 14 years after the death of Jesus, I'm having a hard time finding each one of these in here. About 14 years after the death of Jesus, St. Mary Magdalene, St. Martha, St. Lazarus, and the others of a little band of Christians got into a boat without sails or oar and pushed out to sea to perish in the persecution of the Christians by the Jews of Jerusalem. And they carried with them the body of the lady's mother, St. Anna. And they land in France, in Ars, or in Apt, in France, and that she is buried there and was lost, and then her burial place was discovered in the late 700s, and Charlemagne was a emperor, and was very involved with the church, and he was involved in finding the body of Anne, and they built a church there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Here's a number of icons that have descriptions to go with them.
So that last part about the body being taken to France and Charlotte and so forth, this is not contained in the lives of the saints.
And that's a question I had too.
It's not. It sounds like it's a Western
thing.
and specifically a French.
Western and France, but it was in the
Yeah.
700s,
Yeah.
and so that's the question that comes up with her and I often, is some of these early saints, some of these early writings that I would have thought would have been agreed upon in those years in the 700s by the entire church. Apparently they're not.
No, well, Charlemagne himself was an Arian Christian. So he was also seeking to have the title of Emperor of the Romans, which he got. That's how the Holy Roman Empire came about. Because he wanted to be equal to the Emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Emperor. So it's also during his reign that the so-called donation of Constantine is forged, and other things like that. These traditions. Let's grab on to something that is holy and that will wrap ourselves in that cloak. The lives that I've read, she died in old age, obviously, because she was old when she gave birth to Mary. And she was living with her daughter. Joachim died earlier than
Said in here 10 years earlier.
yeah. And then she was just buried there with her daughter in Jerusalem. And that's
where
all that the lives have said that I've read.
Okay. Well, can you add to what I said, please?
Sure. So you mentioned the three sisters, of whom Anna was one. Among the Jewish tribes, there was a prohibition to marry between the different tribes, with the exception of Judah, which was the royal tribe from whom came the kings, and Levi, which was the priestly tribe from which came the priests and the high priests for the temple. And we get this in the Gospel of St. Matthew, where and Luke for that matter, where they're giving the genealogies. Jesus Christ is descendant from both the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Levi. He is both king and high priest. And this has theological meaning, because Jesus Christ, being both king and priest, he is the king and high priest of Israel. He is the Christ. Well, how does he acquire that lineage? Certainly not from his father, because he was conceived without man. So it has to be through his mother, Mary, which means that she has to also be of both lineages, which in fact she is. It's not surprising that the children of these families who are all related to one another crop up in the Gospels, because Christ's first disciples came from among his own kin. John the Baptist, their cousins. James and John, they are also related. Because if you think about it, and of course it's these myrrh-bearing women, they're all there to take care of his body when he's crucified. If you think about it, this only makes sense. Because how does the human race produce the Christ? It's not just some random event. God has prepared mankind through the history of Israel in its ups and downs, developing a people who could produce a Theotokos. Which means that not only is Mary righteous, but her parents are righteous. And we hear this in the life, where Joachim goes to make the offering at the temple, and he's basically shoved away, saying, "You don't have any children. Your offering can't be acceptable because you don't have any children." And not only the priest, but everybody else is pushing him out. And that's when he goes out into the wilderness and starts praying, taking care of course, they also says, I think this is in the prologue, that they gave, before all of this, they would give a third of their wealth, their animals and income and so forth, to the poor, and a third to the church or the temple, and a third that they would live on. So they are very hospitable, they are very generous, they are fulfilling the commandments of God to treat our neighbor as ourselves. And in this respect, as I think I mentioned, and of course the life also says this, they are very much akin to Abraham and Sarah. Not only because they are old before they have their daughter, as Abraham and Sarah were very old before they had Isaac, but also in the way in which they treat everybody around them. And so Joachim goes off into the wilderness, and he's just praying fervently for God to provide a child. And Anna, he doesn't even go home. He goes straight from the temple out into the wilderness. Anna, who doesn't know exactly what happened to him, but hears, well, he was thrown out of the temple and he's gone away. She's now grieving over the loss of her husband, as well as the not having a child. And so that's when she's praying fervently. Let's see if I can. See if I can read some of this for you. When Joachim heard moreover, a certain Hebrew of the tribe of Reuben, who brought his offerings together with others, reviled Joachim, saying, "Why do you precede me in offering your gift to God? Do you not know that you are unworthy to offer gifts with us, as you have left no seed in Israel?" Joachim heard this. He departed from the temple in great sorrow, being shamed and humiliated. The festivity was turned for him into mourning, and the joy of that feast into lamentation. In his great sorrow he did not return to his home, but went out into the desert to the shepherds tending their flocks. There he wept over both his childlessness and over the reproach and revilement he had suffered. He brought to mind his holy forefather Abraham, to whom God had granted a son even in his old age, and began to pray fervently to the Lord that he might deem him likewise worthy of such a blessing. He prayed that he would hear and show mercy on him, that he would take away his reproach among men, that the fruit of wedlock would be granted to him even in old age, as it was once granted to Abraham, and that he might be called the father of a child, and not be cast away from God to suffer the reproaches of the people. To his prayer he added fasting, and he resolved not to eat bread for 40 days. "I will not eat," he said, "neither will I return to my home. But may my tears serve as my food, and the wilderness as my home, until the Lord God of Israel hears me and visit me." Likewise his wife Anna, who remained at home, wept inconsolably, having learned that the high priest had not accepted their offerings and had reproached their barrenness, and that her husband, in his great sorrow, had left her and gone into the wilderness. "Now," she said, "I have become most wretched. Now am I rejected by God, and suffer the reproaches of the people, and have been abandoned by my husband. What should I weep over first? Over my widowhood or my childlessness? Over my being abandoned or my not having been deemed worthy to be called a mother?" She wept bitterly thus for many days. Once in her grief, Anna went into her garden. Sitting beneath a laurel tree, she sighed from the bottom of her heart, and lifting up her tearful eyes to heaven, she beheld in the tree a bird's nest in which there were little chicks. This sight filled her heart with yet greater sadness, and she began to cry out, "Woe is me, who am childless, for of the daughters of Israel I am the most sinful. I am humbled beyond all women, for all others are granted to bear the fruit of the womb in their arms and are comforted by their children. I alone do not know this consolation. Woe is me, for the gifts of all others are accepted in the temple, and they are esteemed for their having given birth to children. I alone am cast out of the temple of my God. Woe is me! To what may I be compared? Not to the birds of heaven, not to the beasts of the field, for they, O Lord God, bring forth fruit to thee, but I am barren. Nor may I be compared to the earth, when it blossometh, and soweth seeds, and bringeth forth fruit, blessing thee, O heavenly Father, but I am alone on earth and childless. Woe is me, Lord. O Lord, I alone, a sinner, am deprived of fruitfulness. O thou who once granted his son Isaac to Sarah in deepest old age, thou who didst open the womb of Anna, the mother of the prophet Samuel, look down now upon me and hear my prayer. O Lord of Sabbath, thou knowest the reproach I suffer for my childlessness. Put an end to my heart's sorrow. As Anna cried out, weeping and wailing, an angel of the Lord, Gabriel, appeared to her and said, Anna, Anna, your prayer has been heard, and your sighing has pierced the clouds. Your tears have come before God, and you will conceive a daughter most blessed. In her all the tribes of the earth shall be blessed, and through her salvation shall be granted to the whole world, and her name will be Mary. Upon hearing the angel's words, Anna bowed down before God and said, As the Lord God lives, if I should bear a child, I will offer her to his service, that she might serve and praise his name day and night all the days of her life. Filled with ineffable joy, St. Anna hurried to Jerusalem to pray to God and give thanks for his merciful visitation. At the same time, the angel appeared to Joachim in the wilderness and said, Joachim, Joachim, your prayer has been heard, and God has been pleased to grant you his grace. Your wife Anna will conceive and will bear a child, whose birth will bring joy to the whole world. As a sign of the truth of my salutation, go now to Jerusalem, and there at the golden gate you will find your wife Anna, to whom I have announced these same tidings. And so they did. And then in the homily of St. John Chrysostom, he talks about how there's this great blessing and joy, and they invite everybody, and they have great feasts. on her, with her birth and with her naming and with the 40 days and all the rest of the ritual that accompanies the birth of a child. And then after 2 years, Joachim remembers we vowed to give her to God, so 2 years old, it's time to take her to the temple. And Anna says, no, wait till she's 3. Which I think is kind of interesting. So they do that, and then she's taken to the temple with the other girls, and she dances on the steps as Zacharias, the high priest, brings her in, and she spends the whole of her life, well, her youth, I should say, in the temple.
There's an interesting quote here from a hymn of St. Andrew of Crete that says, Anna, the barren and sterile, was not childless before God, for she was foreordained from many generations to become the mother of the pure Virgin, from whom the Maker of all creation sprang forth in the form of a servant.
That is very profound. Etch with St. Andrew of Crete's always profound in his hymns.
They suffered from their childlessness, but they didn't know yet that they weren't childless.
Right. Well, think about it. What is time to God? It is all present. Time does not exist in God. He is the creator of time. We perceive it as a sequence of what came before, what follows after. But with God, it is all eternal. It is a continual presence. And as he chose the Virgin Mary, he chose Joachim and Anna, and before them, their parents. And that's part of what the genealogies in the Gospels allude to. It's also good to note that in those genealogies there are some sinners. They're not all continually pious and so forth. There are people who committed sins, and yet God still derives his humanity from that, which also makes some sense because becoming flesh, he takes upon us, I think as the hymns say, our sinfulness. He who is without sin takes upon himself our sinfulness and overcomes it. Other thoughts, questions, comments? You're all speechless. Seraphim, you have a thought?
Well, just something I read. This is St. Gregory Palamas's homily on the Dormition, saying that when the Mother of God was, living in the Holy of Holies, angels were feeding her with heavenly food.
Yes.
And if Adam had that food, he would not have fallen.
Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So why did Adam not have that food?
Well, he went and ate the wrong food.
But before he ate the wrong food, what was he eating?
The Lord told them that they could eat from any other tree in the whole garden.
Except that one.
You could eat anything in the garden like that. If
That's
Adam,
a strange thing to say.
if Adam had been fed by angels and had not fallen, what would have happened with the human race?
Imponderable.
No, it's not. Adam's disobedience of the commandment leads to his succumbing to sin. but it also leads to his knowledge of good and evil.
Mm.
Is it truly possible for anyone to freely and willingly choose good and God without that knowledge?
Mm.
It's a paradox. If Adam had not fallen into sin, then Christ would not have become flesh. And what does Christ do to human flesh? He sanctifies it.
But was that to get it back to how it was for Adam and Eve? Because when they fell, their flesh was
He does,
changed.
Christ, yes. Christ does not return human nature to the primordial state. He sanctifies it and makes it possible for us to become gods by grace. Somebody once said that Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden were essentially in their spiritual infancy.
Mm.
And it is only through the fall and all that came after that, and the struggle through the centuries with the prophets and the patriarchs and those who fell away and so forth, that mankind could be perfected to the point where the Virgin Mary could be born and receive the Annunciation. And then for us to have a true opportunity to engage in spiritual warfare and overcome sin by the grace of God. Now, I'm not sure that I've read any of the fathers specifically about this. They do talk about how spiritual warfare is necessary to enter the kingdom of heaven. And without that, without the fall, what kind of spiritual warfare is there?
Mm.
But I don't know that I've ever read anybody who said it quite the way I did. So take that with a grain of salt. But it does seem clear to me that this was all part of the divine plan from the beginning, from the beginning of the creation that God made of all the heavens and the earth and all that is therein. And it is also pretty clear that man was specifically chosen to be the creation in this world that would be so blessed with a soul as well as a body, and then the ability to receive the grace of God. We are talking about some very deep theological topics, and it's not hard to fall into error when we're talking like this. So I want to be a little bit careful about that.
I think I remember hearing somewhere, I don't remember where, that had they not eaten of the fruit, God would have given it to them when they were prepared for it.
That's possible, but at the same time, did God not know that they were going to eat of that fruit?
Mm.
God is all-knowing. He had to have known this was how it would work out. Because it's free will. It is the ability of each and every human being to choose whether to obey the commandments of God.
Why would you pick the forbidden fruit there too?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what Eve said. It was that serpent who made me do it, and it was you that gave the tree.
I guess it was his way of testing their love for him.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you truly love someone, then you obey them.
Mm-hmm. You know, Adam and Eve, at the point they were doing that, I think you could say they clearly knew there was a commandment here. They knew that they were told not to do this. I don't think they fully comprehended the consequences of it. But that's often the case when we fall into sin. We don't truly comprehend the consequences of sins.
Mm.
Anything else? You've been extremely silent.
I've just been following along and looking stuff up as people are saying it.
Okay. You're keeping us honest.
Well, no, just looking for a little bit more information on something. Like when you were talking about the Boyers, I looked the Boyers up.
Okay. Did I misspeak about anything?
No. Other than you said a word is a Russian word. Appendage.
Appendage.
Is like it's a French word. The Russian word is like udets or something like that. Something. That was about.
Apanage, something in French.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I've only seen that word used in reference to the
Yeah.
Russian princely lands.
Udio is the.
Well, a lot
Russian.
of those courts were all conducted in French.
Yeah, but 12th century Russian was
Maybe not that soon.
No. It was only after Peter that French became a popular language for the court. Because everybody wanted to be Western. Okay, so we just talked about Michael. There's Peter, Alexis, Jonah, Philip, Hermogen, Macarius, Demetrius, Mitrophon, Tikhon, Theodosi, Joseph, Peterian, Innocent, and John.
Those are all the Wonderworkers?
Yeah, in the in men's. Let's say, oh God. I wonder if Peter is the metropolitan. Who was one of the early metropolitans of all Russia.
Benjamin's looking at
I'm
it.
looking it up. I think.
I can hear
Yeah, I think that's St.
Take it
Peter of
away.
Moscow, first metropolitan of Moscow and all that stuff.
Yes. He's an interesting man. His is an interesting life. He was another one who had to wander quite a bit. Because at that point, the metropolitans of Kiev had no fixed see. They basically were fleeing wherever there was not warfare going on.
Hmm.
Who wants to take on the life of Metropolitan Peter?
I'll do it.
Okay. Let me make a note of this because I will not remember this next week if I don't. Let's see.
If I look up Metropolitan Peter, he's the only one that's gonna show up.
No, you're gonna get the new martyr.
Did you get the murder?
Right,
He'll be in. He'll be in. He's in here and he's in there.
Okay.
I'm sure. And what's the say for next Wednesday?
September 16th is Holy Great Martyr Euphemia.
Somebody want to take on Euphemia?
The all praised Euphemia?
Yes.
Sure, I'll do that.
During the reign of Diocletian. Diocletian.
She was the one that, in her, they put the Confession of the Orthodox on one tome and the Confession of some heretics, I forget, on another. And they put it in her tomb.
This is the same Euphemia?
Yeah. Yes,
Well, we will learn more next week, I believe.
and, the tome of the Orthodox was in her hand the next day.
Mm-hmm. I remember that story.
We have an icon of it too,
And she's holding it.
yeah. And I forget which council it was.
I'm looking for some others here. Oh, another good one, yes. Actually, there's a couple of good ones. There is, on Thursday, the 30th, 17th on the church calendar,
Sophia.
Sophia, Faith, Hope and Love, or Vera Nadezhda Lubov. Should do them as well.
Another thing about
We
Saint,
get Sophia here.
To do it, yeah.
Yeah.
another thing about Saint Euphemia is the soldier Victor was also a martyr at that time, and that was our Victor's
Right.
saint.
Unlikely to get Sophia here.
So who wants to do Sophia and daughters?
Well, seeing how it's my sister's saying, I suppose I could do it.
Thank you. So we'll do 3 of them.
If you don't have this book at home, you can borrow mine.
All the Lives of the Saints? Yeah, okay.
Shall we say the fun prayer?
Yes.
To Joachim.
Joachim and Anna were free from the reproach of childlessness, and Adam and Eve from the corruption of death. By thy holy nativity, O Immaculate One, bless thy people redeemed from the guilt of offenses. Celebrate by Christ